Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 24th of September of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start, and first we're going to start with the south. The Russians during the previous day made another air bombing attack against the Snake Island, the island that Ukrainians were using and currently are using to attack Crimea, to make landing operations and so on. As a result of those strikes, probably the Ukrainian local ammo depots were destroyed. Now we are moving to Kherson direction. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes in this area, the Ukrainians lost 40 soldiers, 2 armored vehicles and 3 armed artillery systems, including M777 howitzer. Also, we got the video how the Russians managed to discover and to destroy the Ukrainian howitzer that was included into the Ministry of Defense report. This is a very interesting video because the howitzer is a static type of weapon. This is not dynamic. The Ukrainians currently are not redeploying their systems from one time of position to another. Basically, they tried to hide weapon, but somehow the Russians managed to discover the episode when the Ukrainians were trying to hide armed artillery system, and after that they made immediate strike with FPV drone or with Lancet strike. Also, the Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainian cities like Kherson. For example, today there was a very powerful FAB strike in this area with a very heavy explosion. The Ukrainians had significant losses, and basically the Russians targeted and destroyed the Ukrainian industrial area, and as a result of that strike, the Ukrainians lost another concentration of their forces. The Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions, the Ukrainian concentration of forces in the settlements like Lvova, Burhunka, Mykolaiivka, Dradokamyanka, Kazatska, and Berislav. According to this picture, you see that there are at least 6 geolocated episodes just for the previous 24 hours of FAB bombings. And as I understand, this is probably the biggest number of strikes with FAB that took place since the beginning of the special military operation in this area. Mainly, the Russians were attacking the settlement by the name of Lvova. This is not the first strike. We discussed the settlement in the past. Usually, the Russians use a Su-34 for these purposes. Each Su-34 has possibility to attack, to bomb the Ukrainian positions with 2 guided bombs. So every single icon usually means at least 2 guided bombs at once. You know that this is very interesting because we see that the Russians are trying to reduce all these settlemental ruins. Most of the mappers, most of the military experts currently talk just about the Battle of Robotyne, the Battle of Klishchiivka, the Battle for Avdiivka. The Ministry of Defense of Ukraine even never in their reports mentioned the settlements like Lvova, Kazatska, Berislav. But if you ask my opinion, I see that currently, according to the Russian concentration of Russian fire, of usage of bombs, as I understand, currently this is the most important area for the Russians, because you know that the Russians doesn't have endless weapon. Everything is limited, and everything you need to use every single day. Furthermore, every day the Ukrainians try to destroy your ammo depot, so that's why everything is limited. But we see that for some reason, for some purposes, the Russians took a decision to take the entire aviation group and to concentrate its fire just in this direction. And obviously this is made not for training purposes or just to show the Ukrainians that we can attack and we will attack. Obviously this is not the reason why the Russians are so over-concentrated on this side of the Dnieper River. Significant number of strikes, significant number of explosions and damage, and probably significant number of losses. The military expert Ryber, the Russian military expert Ryber, reported that as a result of fierce clashes in this area, the Ukrainians managed to cross Dnieper River at some points, and as a result of assault operation or landing operation, the Ukrainians managed to capture almost every single square meter in the islands between the Russian bank of Dnieper River and the Ukrainians in this part of Dnieper. The Russians control just one part of the islands, and I will mark this area with the red cloud. Currently, I'm keeping this area as a gray zone because I'm not sure that the Russians do have 100% control over this territory, and I expect that within the next few days the Ukrainians will increase the pressure and they will complete the capturing of every single island in this area, and after that there's going to be just one thing between Ukrainians and the Russians, and I'm talking about just the water and Dnieper river, and after that the Ukrainians will be able to start their landing operation. As we discussed, I don't believe in this operation because it's too dangerous, too difficult, and not even to cross Dnieper, not even to land the troopers. The most difficult part is to establish a safe and normal supply road from one bank of the river to another. And how the Ukrainians are going to solve this issue, I don't know. The only possible solution for the Ukrainians, like how to establish like a stable supply road, is to capture at once a significant number of territories like this one, like to force the Russians to step back very far to secure the roads by creating like a distance buffer between Russian artillery systems and pontoon bridges that the Ukrainians will establish. But one more time, I don't believe in this operation, and as for me, this is like something like an operation on the false flag or secondary direction, and currently the Ukrainians haven't shown us the primary direction of their attack in this area. Now we are moving to Zaporozhia area, and we're going to talk about the Battle of Rabotina. Today the Ukrainians made attack with cluster rounds against Bakhmut, the settlement that according to Zelensky is included into the 3 cities that Zelensky is planning to capture by the end of this year. And as a result of that attack, there was one man was killed and 11 people were wounded, including children. The Ukrainians were attacking the Bakhmut with cluster rounds. Furthermore, the Ukrainians tried to attack and develop their offensive operation further to the south in direction of Ocherito-Vata, and they were using FPV drones for these purposes to clear the territory. But the Russians discovered the Ukrainian plans, obviously, and the Russians launched their own series of counterattacks, and the Russians were attacking the Verbova and the western part of Verbova. So I expect that maybe very soon we're going to see the beginning of the battle for the city one more time. Also, we got very interesting video from Sudoplat of drone operator squad as a result of significant number of strikes using FPV drones in this area. There was like, and all these explosions, all these attacks took place during the previous few days. The Russians managed to destroy up to 13 armored vehicles and significant number of infantry Ukrainian soldiers somewhere in the vicinity of Zaporozhia, in the vicinity of Rabotina, between the hills. And you know that we see that both sides, either the Russians and the Ukrainians, try to invest their money, invest their time to develop like a very powerful weapon, to develop tanks and rockets, missiles. But you know that something tells me that very soon, within the next 10 years, the infantry on the ground will be completely replaced and removed by FPV drone operators and FPV drones themselves. We are not going to see the infantry very soon in the next generation of warfare. Probably the parties are going to use infantry, but to, let's say, to establish flags, like something like a tradition, like the settlement is considered that the settlement is taken only after the soldier establishes a flag somewhere in the town hall. So maybe this is the only purpose that the forces are going to use soldiers in the futures. But currently we see that FPV drones can do significant, they can complete a lot of tasks on the ground, and both sides, the Russians and the Ukrainians, use them massively. Now we are moving to the Vremivka tactical bridgehead. We haven't received almost nothing after the Ukrainians were defeated in the battle for Novomayorsk. We can discuss this video one more time. The Russians used a regular FPV drone just to drop grenade inside of the tank and to destroy the abandoned tank, and not to allow the Ukrainians to evacuate the tank and basically to restore the tank and to send this tank back to the field. So another type of goals and objectives that FPV drones can complete complete on the battlefield. The Russians reported that as a result of clashes on Zaporozhia and Orikhovo area, the Ukrainians lost around 175 soldiers. So as you can see, 145 soldiers, 9 armored vehicles and 7 artillery systems. So there were no changes on the ground. The level of losses is not so heavy in comparison with the active phase of the Ukrainian greatest counteroffensive, but anyway, the clash is continuous and we'll see what is going to be next. Now we are moving to Avdiivka direction. As I promised, I have updated map according to the previous video that Ukrainians managed to develop some positions in this area. The Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainian forces in Krasnogorovka. Today the Russians discovered the Ukrainian light car who was trying to bring munition to the combat line. The Russians discovered the place where this light car parked, and after that they made a strike, and as a result of the strike, as we can see, the Russians managed to destroy the Ukrainian local ammo depot in this area. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported, for example, today that during the previous night they managed to repel a lot of attacks on Donetsk direction, and there was an attempt to attack of 110th Mechanized Brigade, this one, in direction of Veselaya. That attack was repelled, the Russians reported. The Ukrainians were trying to return control over positions that they lost during the previous Russian counterattack, but the Ukrainians were defeated, and after that the Ukrainians started bombing and shelling the Russian positions in the vicinity of this settlement. From the Russian side, we also got some videos how they were attacking the Ukrainians who was trying to attack the Russians also in the same direction. We see the Ukrainian forces who was trying to move along the tree lines in the vicinity of Veselaya. The Russians discovered those movements and attacked them with anti-tank missiles or different types of weapons. You see the significant explosions, smoke, and probably a lot of armored vehicles and forces were destroyed within those attacks. The Russians reported that as a result of clashes on the Donetsk direction, the Ukrainians lost 305 soldiers, 9 armored vehicles. So as you can see, when talking about the Donetsk direction, the level of losses is still on a very heavy level. Now we are moving to Klishchiivka direction, Bakhmut direction. Today we got a lot of updates, a lot of details regarding this territory. If you remember, yesterday we discussed this area. We draw some triangles and a square. Triangle in the vicinity of Klishchiivka and a square in the vicinity of Paraskovyevka, and on this area. And for example, when talking about the southern triangle, when talking about Klishchiivka, the Russians are saying that Ukrainians do control this territory. They have established control over Klishchiivka. To be more precise, they forced the Russians to step back from this territory. But also the Russians are saying that Ukrainians do have possibilities to send forces inside of Klishchiivka, to send forces inside of Avdiivka, but the Ukrainians don't have possibilities to evacuate their forces from this area. So everything that enters Klishchiivka stays in Klishchiivka forever. Everything that moves in direction of Avdiivka stays in Avdiivka forever. And obviously not as something that can leave, obviously something as a dead body. The Russians continue attacking and bombing the Ukrainian forces on the hill 205.7, trying not to allow the Ukrainians to concentrate their forces, so just a regular military routine, nothing special. The Ukrainians think that they control this territory, and the Russians are not planning to counterattack because there are no places to hide, there are no trenches to hide, and obviously there are no even trees with green leaves where Ukrainians can hide under the Russian fire. And when late autumn comes, the situation for the Ukrainians is going to be even worse on this direction. Very interesting updates are coming from the northern part of Paraskovyevka, Orikhovo-Vasylivka. If you remember, the last time we discussed this area, I was talking that the Russians, we were talking about the square between the railways, and we discussed that this is one of the most important area in this sector because of that this area is encircled with the railways, which makes the defense process of this area much easier in comparison with another territories and other sectors. And we discussed that the Russians have established a foothold exactly in this area by penetrating the railway railways that goes from Razdolovka to Paraskovievka. And I told you that anyway, sooner or later, because of this foothold, the Russians will try to develop this area, and we discussed this yesterday. And right after we complete the conversation, the Russian sources started reporting that as a result of offensive operation from Paraskovievka and Solidar, in the vicinity of Zaliznianska, the Russians managed first to enter Orikhovo-Vasylivka and to capture this territory, obviously. And the sources are saying that currently the Russians are trying to finish the clearing operation. If it's true, obviously this is significant success for the Russian forces, and the main reason is that there is a canal, it's a small river that have already split this territory in few parts, and if the Russians manage to capture Orikhovo-Vasylivka, that means that they have split this territory also into two parts, the southern part below the red line and the northern part above this red line, and basically the Ukrainian forces were split in two parts, and now they have a lot of logistic problems. Of course, we need to get some video confirmations. This piece of information is not wasn't confirmed by any geolocated video, and this information is just from the Russian sources. But anyway, this is very interesting whether it's true or not. If it's true, the Ukrainians do have problems, and now the Russians can attack either in direction of Grigorievka and as well as in direction of Minkovka and further in direction of Dubrovo. So they have now a lot of options what to do. The Russians even have possibility to attack in Novomarkova. So a lot of options, a lot of things. And if it's true, of course, the Ukrainians have a lot of problems. The Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainians in the vicinity of Bogdanovka in front of Bergovka. Today we got also a lot of geolocated videos how the Russian FPV drones made significant number of strikes, and as a result of those strikes, the Russians managed to damage and destroy a lot of Ukrainian shelters along the railways that goes from Bakhmut in direction of Chasov Yar. Now we are moving to Kupiansk-Liman direction. Today we got also a lot of videos, a lot of updates, and I would like to discuss with you one important video. The video that was published by the Ukrainian sources. And probably this video, I was very impressed when I saw this video. Very impressed. One more time, this video was published by the Ukrainian sources, and there are a lot of very interesting things. From one side, from one point of view, when you see this video, you probably will not see anything special, at least from first point of view. But I would like to point your attention that this is Ukrainian FPV drone, and just take a look how experienced the FPV drone operator is. He is flying between trees without no problems, without any risk to hit the trees and be destroyed, or to make explosion before it's necessary. So just take a look how professionally he's flying from one tree to another, trying to find the Russian position. The second thing that you need to mention is that a Ukrainian FPV drone flies very low to the surface, on the very low distance, and from this perspective I don't see any problems, for example, for Russian soldier to shot down FPV drone with a gun, because the FPV drone is very on the low level from the surface. This is the second thing. The third thing that you need to mention is that there are no Russian soldiers, because they're afraid of this FPV drone and they're trying to hide themselves among trenches and so on, trying not to risk and not to get on the surface, because they understand that they will immediately killed. And the final phase of this FPV drone video amazed me most of all. Just take a look. At some point the FPV drone mentioned some Russian building or some Russian construction, and after that the operator took a decision to fly inside of this building, and just take a look how he is very carefully, slowly entering the entire building, and we still see the picture. FPV drone give us a very nice understanding of the situation, and only after FPV drone entered the shelter there was an explosion. Very interesting video, and today I realized the thing that we discussed, that FPV drones is the future, and not just like FPV strikes as we saw from Sudoplatov. For example, as I show you the video in the beginning, this one, this is like this already is like 20th century. It's like a past age. When you see a target and then with the FPV drone, with the strict line, you're attacking this or that position. This is already the past. This is not the future. This is like the situation that we saw months or 2 months ago when FPV drones see a target and then the FPV drones strike the target. The video that we just seen from the Ukrainian side is the future. It's the future when you can fly above the territory with one FPV drone and to control the entire situation. And this is exactly why I'm telling you in the beginning of the video why FPV drones will replace people on the ground. Because if you are able to control the territory with FPV drone as this operator, that means that you don't need soldiers on the ground at all, because they're just a free target for FPV drones. They're a free target for an enemy. The only possibility, the only type of weapon that can shut down this FPV drone is another FPV drones in hands of a very experienced soldier. That's it. There is no other solution. When talking about Kupiansk and Liman front line, the Russians reported that as a result of clashes in this area, the Ukrainians lost around 70 soldiers and 6 armored vehicles. As you can see, the level of losses is also probably the lowest since the beginning of the Ukrainian greatest counter-offensive operation, and the Ukrainian sources reported that they managed to restore the bridge in Kupiansk, which means that they managed to restore supply and support of their forces in the vicinity of Petropavlovka and Sinkovka. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.